A bit about. I mean, one of the things I looked at recently, Joe, was the Martin Val Baker put out a book in the 80s called 80 from the 80s, and you were you were in that. Yeah.
Yeah,
and so I think Sue Monroe would have interviewed you for that.
I think she did, yeah. Yeah.
And I think you talked to her about how you did national service and.
Yeah, when I was 18.
Yeah. Was that the standard thing that people had to do it at a particular age, or did you?
Yes, you had to do it when you were 18,
Yeah.
unless you were a conscious objector. And of course, I never knew anything about that,
Yeah.
conscious objection. And so I went in at 18. I was first of all put in the Devonshire Light Infantry out at Crown Hill, and given a rifle with a bayonet, and we were rushing across fields, sticking them into bags of straw, and I thought, this is supposed to be a human being. Wow, I couldn't imagine myself doing that. I was very lucky, really, because another young chap my age said, why don't you put in for driving? So I said, well, I can't drive. He said, oh, they'll teach you. So I kept asking. I asked about 3 times. Then suddenly they said to me, oh, here's your ticket to Catterick in Yorkshire to go up to complete your basic training, and then you would go to Ripon where you were taught how to drive. This is Royal Corps Signals by this time. So that's what I did.
Had you grown up in Cornwall or in Plymouth? Or?
Partly in Cornwall, born in Plymouth in Higher Stoke, and then because of the war, we went first to Carthew in the China Clay country above St Austell, stayed with Cornish friends, and then we went briefly to Scotland for a bit, and then we came back and we lived in Gallant near Foy. Went to school there, went to school in Carthew and in Gallant, and then we went to Lostwithiel. It was our main place until the end of the war. I went to school there as well.
And so you would have been born in the mid-30s?
1933.
1933, okay.
1933.
Yeah.
And the thing about the army was that I went to Egypt.
Yeah.
In 1952, I think it was. I was there when Farouk was deposed, and so it started my interest in Egypt. I started studying it when I came home. I was working on the railway before I went in the army. I went back on the railway for a bit. I wanted to drive buses. As you can see, there's an interest in old buses in this place. And you couldn't drive on the Western National then until you were about 23 or something, so I had to wait a bit. And then I got my PSV and went driving. In 1957, I went to Lairbridge and went driving those very old buses.
So by 50, so what were the years that you were out in Egypt on doing
52,
national service?
53.
Okay, early 50s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were back, so you spent most of the 50s. You were down in the West Countries and Devon area, because I know you.
Yeah, I was down here. I didn't go to London until 1959. I went driving the buses in 57, 3 years there, Bridge, and then I'd already been doing voluntary work in the Plymouth Museum. Because I read a book by Mortimer Wheeler years and years ago, and I got interested in archaeology, so I did voluntary work. And then we started excavating in spare time at Plimpton Priory, an Augustinian site. And I started going on my holidays to widen my experience a bit, so I went to Verulamium in St Albans, dug on the Roman city with Shepherd Freer, and went to Wales and dug at Dinas Powys with Leslie Alcott. Just to widen the experience, really. And then Valerie Ledger at the museum said to me, well, if you want to get anywhere in archaeology, you need to go to London and do study at the Institute of Archaeology, which is part of the University of London. So I went off in 59. And there was a little bit of a break with that, because the other side of me, which you don't know about, I suppose, is that because of our Roman Catholic background, we were very much involved in the church. And I thought about it a lot when I was in Egypt and questioned it quite a lot. But there was something I wanted to do with regard to a priesthood. I was looking after a priesthood. So at some point, I gave up the archaeology at the Institute and I went to a Jesuit college at Isleworth called Campion House. The reason I had to do that was I couldn't go directly to a seminary, because in those days you had to study partly in Latin. You needed Latin, which I certainly didn't have. My schooling finished at the age of 15. So I went and did church history.
Was that the school? Sorry, is that the school down in Lostwithiel?
Lostwithiel. No, I came.
Back
at the end of the war to a secondary modern school. All the failures went to a secondary modern school in Plymouth.
In Plymouth, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and where we were caned mercilessly by the nuns, I'm afraid to say. But anyway, I can look at that philosophically now and think those nuns were just as much victims as we were, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had to get it out of my system. I went to camping nest for 1 year, and by the end of that, I decided, no, it wasn't really for me. I went back to archaeology.
Yes.
And the great thing about the institute was that the lecturers there were often also directors of excavations all over the world.
Yeah.
So, of course, I met Seton Williams, a very eccentric Australian lady.
Seton Williams, yeah.
And I found that she had a concession to dig a site in the Nile Delta called Tel El Pharaoin, the Mound of the Pharaohs, which was an ancient city site of the snake goddess Wadjet in Egypt. And I did 4 seasons there, 1965, 66, 67 during the war, and 68 was the last time we worked there. And that was a great site, actually.
That sounds amazing. And so sorry, what were you going to?
That piece of stone comes from the innermost part of that temple, a piece of quartzite stone.
Fabulous.
Yeah, that was an amazing place.
Yeah.
And then the last year I was there in 68, a young Canadian professor turned up to do inscriptions and things, Donald Redford, and I got to know him, and he said he was looking for his own site in Egypt, so I said, well, if you get a site, I'd be interested in some work.
Yeah.
And thereafter, really, almost all the rest of the work I did in Egypt was for Professor Redford. He was originally at the University of Toronto, and then he would have had to retire because of his age, so he went to Penn State University in America, where he still is. He's only a year younger than me, and he's still a professor.
I think you said in one of your phone calls to me that that you discovered Robert Graves at around about that time. Is that right? Was it?
Yeah, that was very early. That was 1965.
Yeah.
When I was at Bhutto in the Delta in 1965, Michael Roaf was there.
How do you spell Roaf?
Roaf. He was from Oxford.
Okay.
He did become director of the British School in Baghdad many years later.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, he was there with us. A really lovely chap, and I got on very well with him. And he was reading The White Goddess.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of it at that point.
Yeah.
I looked it up when I got back and got my copy of that yellow cover there.
Lovely, yeah. Faber and Faber.
And so he got me very much into that and very much thinking about the goddess things. That's quite true.
So, but also you were in between going to Egypt. You were obviously coming back to London as sort of in between,
I was coming back
did
to
you
London,
did you
so
have a
what
base
happened
as
was,
such, or
I got a job as a research assistant to Dr. Wainwright. He was in the Ministry of Works, what they call the Inspectorate of Ancient Monuments. So we excavated British sites during the season, like henge sites. We excavated Durrington Walls, Wiltshire, Marden near Devizes, and Mount Pleasant near Dorchester. 3 great henge sites, massive late Neolithic monuments. That made me think a lot about paganism too.
I bet.
Because I thought, putting all that work into monuments like that, which weren't fortresses at all, they were great ritual sites. Digging a ditch, when you think Durrington Walls is like 1,100 feet in diameter, the ditch is 20 feet deep and 40 feet across, cut out of chalk with red deer antler picks. That's work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really made me think.
So during this time, did you have sort of a base, somewhere that you lived, or were you
Yes,
sounds like you were moving around
I was
quite a lot?
lucky in those days. I was able to live in Chelsea. I lived in Elm Park Road in Chelsea, at number 32.
A good place to be in the 60s.
Yeah.
I guess it was.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah.
Because I think you mentioned a bit about Gandalf Garden.
Yes, which was at the World's End.
Which would have
Chelsea.
opened in the late 60s, I guess, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's right. By the late 60s, yes, that's right.
But you remember visiting there, and because there was a sort of a cafe kind of.
Yeah, I used to visit and pick up the magazine, but I didn't really become part of it.
Yeah.
I've got a curious relationship with the 60s, really, because I was never into the drug scene. I wasn't really into, I suppose, the typical music, and I was into really traditional folk music. And so I used to go to Bungie's, a little cafe off Charing Cross Road. I used to go to Cecil Sharp House, and things like that. And I followed up that a great deal, really. And of course, obviously later I got very interested in all the Cornish stuff, Brenda Wooten, and I used to see Brenda Wooten a number of times, and her husband. And got very much into all that stuff. And of course,
did you ever go to any of the Cornish folk clubs, the older ones?
No, my brother went there, but for some reason I didn't seem to be there at the time.
Yeah, well, you were abroad, I think, a lot in the 60s.
Yeah, I was abroad a lot. Yeah, because yes, I've worked in Egypt 23 times, So, and then of course I worked a lot in Crete. In the 80s, I was mostly working in Crete, on the south coast of Crete, for different professors from the University of Toronto, the Shores.
Yeah.
In fact, those red books are just all about one site in Crete, in which I've got a number of my drawings, because of course I got on to making illustrations of small finds. That's what I got onto really from the digging aspect.
But you were talking about the 60s in London, and so you would have picked up that the Gandalf's Garden. I mean, Gandalf's Garden only ran to about six editions, and it was a short.
I've only got 3 copies, I think.
Yeah, but it was quite a short-lived thing, and yet I think you said to me something like it was through reading that you got interested in Tony Kelly and the communes.
Yes, Tony Kelly put an article in. There were 2 pieces, 2 of them, and I got interested in him, and we did go and visit him at some point in Wales. And I mean, that must have been 1969, I think, the first time I got into that. I was my last time in London, really, because I went to live in Aldermaston Village and commuted to London for my last job, right up to about 71. But
sorry, so you went to Aldermaston. You moved there in the late 60s, or in about 71? Did you say?
Yeah, it must have been 1970.
Yeah. Okay. Because you said
that,
yes.
I was doing pottery there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I commuted 5 days a week into London.
You could sort of live in adjacent to the pottery or something, could you, or as part of? Or
he had a cottage there, 29 the street, and I had a room downstairs myself.
Yeah. I think it's quite a well-known pottery, wasn't it?
Oh, Alan Cager Smith.
Did you get, while we're talking about Aldermaston, were you involved in any of the marches or anything that were happening?
Not down there, but in the 60s, my sister and myself, we were very much a part of the marches in London. Yeah, we went on all of them. And Bruce Kent was very much around in those days as a church man. We were still Catholics at the time, though pretty radical ones. And so we often met Archbishop Roberts, who was the ex-Archbishop of Bombay. He was one of the very few hierarchy that came on peace marches. And he was a marvellous character, really.
So you didn't go on the Aldermaston marches?
No,
you went on various other, but you went on the other various other marches that are happening in London.
Big ones in London.
Yeah.
Big ones in London. Yeah, we were very involved with all that. So we met. Yeah, we became part of the C&D. We became part of, for a brief while, the Catholic Libertarians. Yeah. And all sorts of stuff like that, you know. Yeah. So all that stuff made me rethink lots of things. I met lots of anarchists and all sorts of people, really. And so I think during the 60s, I was a very, very radical Roman Catholic. We were all hoping like mad that the Second Vatican Council would really clean up the church quite a lot and make very big differences. But it made some differences. But and we did like John the 23rd as a pope. I thought it was really quite refreshing. A bit like the present one, really. And that was really quite nice. But no, in the end, it couldn't hold me, really. I'd always had problems with the sexual teachings of the church. I'd always had real problems with that. And I just couldn't take it anymore. So Gandalf's Garden was the very first one that mentioned paganism. But in 1970, I found The Waxing Moon. Yeah. And I've still got that first issue. Yeah. And that enabled me to go and meet Joe Wilson. Yeah. Who was, to my surprise, a sergeant in the American Army, living out at Bicester in Merry Quarters.
So just to clarify, because at the time you'd have been in Aldermaston, he'd have been in Bicester, that's right. So it's not that far, is it?
No, it's not very far. No, but I didn't. It was quite separate that I learned about him because of the Waxing Moon.
Yeah, but you could have gone and visited. The point is, he used to put on monthly meetings, didn't he?
He did, yeah. I went to one of his meetings, only one, actually. And then also through the Waxing Moon, I think got in touch with Ruth Wynne Owen. He went under a different name in the beginning, Sophronia, but she was Ruth Wynne Owen. And I did meet her a number of times and had quite a correspondence with Ruth.
She was from somewhere like Ealing or somewhere in London?
Yes, she when I first contacted her, she was up in Yorkshire. Okay. And then she moved to Ealing. And then she moved to Wales next to sea. But I corresponded with her all those times, met her a few times, and got to know about the plant bran, which is her family stuff. Very interesting woman, actually. And at the time when I was in London, I knew about Alex Sanders. I wanted to
ask you about that, actually.
I actually went to live in Ladbroke Square. So I was very close to where they were at Clanricarde Garden.
Well, they were. I've made some notes here of questions to ask you, because that was one of the big things about the 60s, I guess, is they were very public, weren't they?
They were extremely public.
He was a real publicist, and I think
it put me off a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to see notices in Atlanta saying, you know, he was going to hold a big meeting in some big hall. Dare you meet Europe's most powerful witch? I'm saying, oh dear, it's a bit cringe-making.
Yeah, because of the the fact that he was,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
all about him, really.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, he did contribute something. You know, we have strange bedfellows in paganism, don't we?
yeah,
So I mean, both Gardner and him, I think we can be grateful for.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he just brought it to public attention much more and
Yeah,
brought it
much
out
more.
and
Yeah, much
made
more
it
so.
not exactly mainstream, but more accessible to people.
A lot more people entered the craft because of him.
Yeah,
That's quite.
but it's interesting
quite
that you said that you didn't. In a way, it was the Gandalf's Garden that made you think about paganism, but he would have. Alex Sanders would have been active a bit earlier than that, wouldn't he? In getting into
he would have
papers
been,
and stuff.
but I didn't know
You
about
didn't
him. You know,
connect. You didn't connect with it
didn't
particularly.
connect with him. No, and in fact, one of my early archaeological sites, funnily enough, when I went to London, one of my early sites was a weekend. I used to go to Bricket Wood and dig on a Roman site, and I was quite unaware of the fact that Gardner's group
Yeah.
was meeting there.
Well, the other group that were active in the 60s were the Cochrane group that became
Cochrane group became
the Windsor Coven and
the Regency.
the Regency, and I think you had some contact with them, did you?
Yeah.
Was that in the 60s or the 70s? Do you
No,
think?
it wasn't until about 1970.
Yeah.
70, I think 71. Yes. Ron White put something in one of the Wiccans, I think it was. Or I should say the Waxing Moon. That's where he put something in one of that. And I got in touch with him, yeah. I wrote to him. And he told me that they were the Regency were meeting in Queen's Wood, in London. And so I went to a few of their meetings, but it was really my last. In fact, some of the meetings I went to, I'd already left London, and I was going through. It just so happened I was going through abroad, and I could actually attend some of their ceremonies, and that's where I got to know John Smart.
Yes. Who later
He
moved
was
to
my main
Boscastle.
friend in the Regency,
Right.
John Smart, and we corresponded for quite a long time,
Mm.
and then we didn't meet each other for years and years and years.
Mm.
And I was down at the Wishcraft Museum, and suddenly he turned up.
Yeah. And he was living in Boscastle.
Living in Boscastle,
Yeah.
running a cafe.
Yeah.
So the Regency was quite an important element, really, and we've.
Well, in the sense, were they the first time that you'd really been involved with ritual, or sort of witnessed it, been part of it?
Public ritual, I think. Must have been the first time, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was, because I think they were about the first people that did it
Yeah.
in public.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I think it must have been, really. And so, yes, I took myself through a kind of initiation in the cottage at Aldermaston, around about the Feast of Samhain in 1970. I accepted paganism being my faith in 1970.
And that was like a private ritual you did for your
Private one I did myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Using a little wooden goddess figure, which you see later.
Okay. Yeah.
Over there, from the Philippines.
Right. Okay, I'll have a look at
I've
that.
got two of them, but that was the first one.
Yeah.
I bought it in the King's Road.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I kind of started then. I
Yeah.
accepted that was my faith. I never had any doubts about that
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
But then I never entered the craft until much later. I was kind of practicing witchcraft because, I mean, these early people I met were into witchcraft. So I was really interested in it, but books on it and stuff like that. You know, I used to go a lot to Atlantis and things like that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until '84 that I actually entered the craft. I had various people visit me, you know. I had Lauren Liebling, who knew Starhawk, came in to visit me when I was down in West Cornwall. See, I started in that caravan down there. I started in a tent in Lamorna in about 1975.
Yeah.
And then I found the caravan. I moved into it in October '76. Started doing my own rituals there under the name of Nemeton with friends, with Cheryl
Yeah.
at times. And but Lauren came over and stayed with me for a week. And then she sent Starhawk over. So in 1984, Starhawk came over. She was doing lecture trips in Germany. So I agreed to meet her off the ferry here. And I met her off the ferry.
In Plymouth?
Yeah.
She came to Plymouth?
Yeah, I met her here. She hired a car straight away, and we drove down to Lamorna. I got her free lodgings in Rosemary.
Oh, right, where the Fogo is.
Under
Yeah.
Jeremy, who was called Peter then, but Rosemary. And I took her walking along the coast. We went out to Nanjizzle, waded out in the sea, went into a cave, we did some chanting. And then we arranged through the bookshop to do a ritual up at Muskednan, up on the moor there with that stone circle. And a number of people, we went up there, we had flaming torches, we had quite a few people came in different directions, and we did a beautiful ritual there that night. And then we drove, Starhawk wanted to go to Tintagel, so we drove to Tintagel, had a good exploration there, and Merlin's Cave and up on the top. And then we drove to Glastonbury, where through Gothic Image, we'd made an arrangement that we were going to do a ritual on the tour. So when we drove into Glastonbury, there was a great big mass of really exotic looking people with great big carved staffs and all sort of outside the Gothic Image.
Excellent.
And later that we went up on the tour and did one up close to the top, but not at the actual top, in which we did a path working going into the tour and everything. And the idea was to bring the consciousness of the goddess back to Glastonbury, which I suppose it did really. But anyway, that was a great one. And then I couldn't stay any longer. I had to go back to Cornwall. But Starhawk went on to London to meet another friend of mine, Daniel Cohen.
Yes.
From
Wooden Water, yeah.
I knew him for quite a while. And they went then to the Green and Women.
Of course, yeah.
You see?
Yep.
Which is great. So I kept in touch on and off, sporadically, with Starhawk. And I also was in touch with Margot Adler. I never met Margot Adler, but because when they started, I became a member of the Fellowship of Isis in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
I got to know Lady Olivia a bit because she was interested in my work in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in those days, they used to publish all the names and addresses. I suppose they wouldn't do that these days.
Yes.
And so when I read Margot Adler's book, Stephen Schubert from Toronto bought me a paperback copy. I was so impressed by it. I wrote to her in New York,
Yeah.
So not only did she reply, but she sent me a hardback copy signed. So
Fabulous. Oh, this one, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, there it is. Which was very nice, and we corresponded for a bit.
Yep.
And,
Joe, can I just